Tehran says it's ready to unpick some of the 2015 nuclear deal a year after Washington withdrew from the accord. This as Mike Pompeo gets guarantees from Baghdad that US interests in the region will be protected. South Africans prepare to vote with the ruling ANC party set for a bruising at the ballot box. We bring you the latest in our series of special reports, which today looks at the spike in xenophobic violence. And Liverpool put 4 goals in the net to defeat Barcelona and bag themselves a place in the Champions League final on the 1st of June. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom here in Paris. I'm Thomas Waterhouse. First for you this hour, exactly 12 months have now ticked by since Donald Trump pulled the US out of the Iran nuclear deal. On the first anniversary of that withdrawal, President Rouhani is set to make a statement, with his foreign minister already saying that there will be cutbacks on Iran's voluntary commitments to that accord. French presidential sources say that European powers could reimpose sanctions if Tehran backtracks on its promises. Well, with more on what could be in the pipeline from Iran this Wednesday, here's our correspondent, Reza Sayah.
At some point, the Iranian Foreign Ministry is going to inform envoys representing the 5 remaining signatories to the nuclear deal. That's France, Germany, UK, Russia, and China. And then later in the day, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is going to address nation in a speech, and presumably he's going to announce what Iran is planning to do. All of this, of course, is Iran's response to the so-called maximum pressure campaign by U.S. President Donald Trump. 1 year ago, President Trump breached the nuclear deal, pulling the U.S. out. He reimposed sanctions in an attempt to cut off Iran's oil sales, even to its leading buyers. Soon after that, it blacklisted Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. And just this week, the Trump administration claiming that U.S. intelligence says that Iran is poised to attack some U.S. interests, and that's why it says the U.S.S. Lincoln, an aircraft carrier, has been deployed to the region, although we should point out that aircraft carrier left the U.S. state of Virginia in April on a mission that was already planned.
Well, as Washington increases its warnings to Tehran, the US Secretary of State has made an unexpected visit to Iran's neighbor this Tuesday. Mike Pompeo cancelled talks in Germany to head to the Iraqi capital instead for a meeting with the Prime Minister. Following those discussions, Pompeo said he'd secured guarantees from Iraqi leaders that they will protect US interests in the Middle East region. Our correspondent Simona Fulton has more.
Of course, Iraq is a country that has very good relations with both Iran and the United States. And in light of the increasing tensions between these two countries, this visit is likely to reaffirm U.S. strategic goals in Iraq and to advance both the military and economic objectives of the United States. Well, in Iraq, we have seen growing opposition to U.S. military presence here. There has been a mounting push of certain groups in parliament to see the complete departure of U.S. forces here, in addition to outright threats from Iranian-backed paramilitary groups that operate here. So against this backdrop, there have been growing tensions between these two sides. And the fact that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo cited security concerns, I would say that the relations with Iran were likely top of the agenda.
To other world news now. The March local election in Istanbul was tarnished by too many irregularities which we could not ignore. That's what the Turkish president told Parliament this Tuesday, as he insisted that a rerun of that mayoral race will only strengthen democracy. The opposition, however, says the cancelling of the first ballot's results means that the will of the people has been trampled on. Let's listen now to what the man who won the March vote has been saying, and a snippet of Recep Tayyip Erdogan's comments.
I hope the decision will be good for Istanbul as well as our country. As politicians, we see this decision as the right step to strengthen our will to solve our problems within the law and democracy, and to let the people decide.
This is a big blow to our democracy. We have to repair this together. But let us say this to our people and to residents of Istanbul. Everything's going to be all right.
Well, a little earlier, France 24 spoke to the author and sociologist Denise Bagriasik. This was her take on take two of Istanbul's mayoral race.
I mean, we were not expecting, honestly, we were not expecting this re-election. And the reason, because of the cancellation, is the unlawful establishment of ballot box stops. But we know it's a political decision. And this is why I think that Turkish society is a bit sometimes difficult to understand how they will react for in terms of voting. But they usually have this tendency of to vote for the oppressed figures, which means that if they think that if there's injustice in the society for a long time, they will be voting for that person. And İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, is becoming the representation of this figure.
To Africa now, and the makeup of Sudan's interim government is slowly taking shape, but the country's current military rulers are determined to see Islamic Sharia law and traditions ingrained in any future constitution. The protesters who pushed longtime President Omar al-Bashir from power last month continue to call on the army to hand over power to a civilian body. With more from the capital, Khartoum, here's our correspondent Julia Steers.
After a week of stalled negotiations, Sudan's military council responded to a document on Tuesday night that was previously presented to them by protest leaders. The document outlined their vision for an interim government to move the country forward and to replace the military council that's currently leading the country. The document outlined a sovereign council as well as a cabinet and a 120-person legislature. The military said that they believe the document represented the protest movement's goodwill in moving the country out of this current period of unknown and into a state of genuine democracy. That said, many questions remain still, namely a question that's been lingering for over a week about the exact makeup, the level of representation from both sides, the military and the civilian side, on this joint council, as well as the period of time that the interim government will remain in place before elections can be held here, with the military saying they would like a period of 2 years and the civilian side saying they feel the government should be in place for 4 years before elections can be held. The military also insisted that it's particularly important to maintain Islamic Sharia law in any interim government that is put in place. So still many questions to be negotiated in the days ahead, and the protest leaders say that if they don't get their will, that they're ready to continue the sit-in here in Khartoum and to perhaps escalate their actions further.
Meanwhile, the Rainbow Nation is gearing up for elections this Wednesday. 57 million South Africans have registered to have their say in what will be the 6th national vote since the end of apartheid. Polling stations will open their doors at 7 a.m. local time. The scandal-rocked ANC party, which has been in power since 1994, is likely to bag a majority once again, but the movement is predicted to score worse than it did 5 years ago. This next report on the rise of xenophobic attacks across the country comes from our correspondents Caroline Dumais and Stefan Carstens.
He was left for dead on the side of the highway, and when he looks back over the pictures of himself, Tinai Takawira remembers all too well. He was stabbed because he was Zimbabwean.
Said we are foreigner, don't want no need of foreigners here. We are driving a taxi, us is not working.
It's a miracle that this driver is still alive. One of his friends was less fortunate. 2 weeks ago, he was burnt alive in his truck. South African hauliers employ large numbers of foreign workers. Attacks are frequent.
This is the reality in the transport industry. Though authorities, they try to sanitize it, to regard it as a criminal event, but there's element of xenophobia in place.
Attacks on working immigrants reflect South Africa's frustrations over growing unemployment, and the authorities regularly fan the flames by promising to control the borders. Immigration has been a campaign topic for all the political parties. Last week, the mayor of Johannesburg spoke out about his concerns.
There can be no doubt that immigration crisis in our country, it's actually contributing pressure on government to provide services with our limited funding. As I've just really indicated, another practical example in our clinics, where presently we get between 25 and 39% of people visiting our clinics being undocumented people.
Without a census, no one knows how many foreigners live in South Africa. But migrants' associations urge the authorities to stop stigmatizing them.
If we trace 2008, 2015, and again now this election season, there's this pattern of eruption with xenophobia and a large denialism within politicians.
Tinay and his friends are keeping their heads down in the hope they'll be able to keep working. They've been living legally in South Africa for 10 years and have nowhere to go.
In other world news, the French president will be shaking hands with the Libyan prime minister later this Wednesday as Fayez al-Sarraj's European tour continues. Now, the relationship between those two men has soured recently, with Sarraj accusing Emmanuel Macron of supporting his rival Khalifa Haftar in his assault to take control of the city of Tripoli. The Libyan prime minister began his trip in Rome with talks with his Italian counterpart before he then headed to Germany to meet with Chancellor Angela Merkel. Our correspondent Nick Spicer had more earlier on why Sarraj felt he just had to leave Libya at this very difficult time for his country.
The UN says over 430 people have been killed in fighting since the beginning of April, mainly on the outskirts of the capital, Tripoli. It warns of the risk of a renewed civil war. If you put yourself in the shoes of the internationally recognized Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj, a fifth of the National Assembly basically rebelled against him and elected a new speaker on Sunday who is allied or seen as allied with Khalifa Haftar. But what is he to do? He can't. If he stays at home, the situation will just worsen. And I think he's made the calculated decision that it is best for him to go abroad and to seek foreign support where it can be found, keeping in mind that this isn't a conflict between two men, between, Khalifa Haftar, who's recently received support from Donald Trump and himself, but a clash between regional powers. Khalifa Haftar, just to take an example, has the backing of Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt. So foreign powers at play here. This isn't just about two men.
The UN Secretary-General has been one of many to share his relief after Myanmar released hundreds of prisoners this Tuesday, including two Reuters journalists. The pair had spent 500 days behind bars in the notorious insane prison in Yangon for their coverage of the Rohingya migrant crisis, but have now been reunited with their families. They say they now can't wait to get back to work and rejoin their colleagues in the Reuters newsroom there in Asia. And finally, the beer has been flowing on Merseyside this Tuesday evening after Liverpool beat Barcelona 4-0 to secure themselves a place in the Champions League final. It's the first time in the history of the European Football Cup that a club has come from 3 goals down after the first leg of a semi-final to then make it to the final. Liverpool will face either Ajax or Tottenham on June the 1st. Well, earlier we spoke to David Webber, a lecturer in football studies. He had this to say about the atmosphere in the stadium in Liverpool.
I mean, Anfield on nights, on European nights, is a great place to be. I would probably say this, but it's the best place to watch a European tie. Tonight, though, Anfield reached several decibels louder. Just the ground was rocking right from the word go. Even before the game kicked off, before even the players arrived in the stadium, you could just tell that the fans were up for this. They gave the team a huge welcome, and I think it just translated onto the pitch. Liverpool were just so quick and snapped into the tackle, broke up play, sprayed the ball around. There was a real sense of purpose, a real sense of drive from Liverpool, and it just tumbled down from the stands. And I think the Liverpool fans tonight deserve an awful lot of credit for that result.
That's all for now. Do stay tuned to France 24.